Welcome everyone to Myth Informed with your hosts Brian and Dimitri. Today we have with us the world-renowned Karen Garst, PhD from the University of Wisconsin, Madison, and retired executive director of the Oregon State Bar. Karen has authored 2 books on why women should abandon religion and is the creator of the popular Faithless Feminist blog. Karen, welcome to Myth Informed.
Well, thank you so much. Now, I do have to compliment you guys because you're one of the first podcasts I was on, and I did my slide presentation for a meeting. You invited me to Mythcon last year, so you're right at the top of my fave list.
That is awesome. I'll take that as a compliment.
I know. Yeah,
absolutely. And for those that may know the name and don't know her but have heard the name, she is going to be not only coming to Mythcon 5 but on stage speaking with Karen Strawn, who will describe herself as an anti-feminist. And Karen, I think you describe yourself as the faithless feminist. So this is going to be an awesome conversation. Karen squared, or however you want to look at that. But yeah, tell us, faithless feminist, where's that coming from?
Well, when I decided to write a book, and I did that based on, I had a lunch with a friend of mine who's an author, and she said, "Oh, you should write a book." And it was 2 days after the U.S. Supreme Court had issued its decision in Burwell v. Hobby Lobby, which held that closely held corporations could have religious views. Hello. And that because of their religious views, they didn't have to provide certain forms of birth control to their female employees. And so I said, the only thing I'd like to write about is religion.
And that makes a lot of sense. I know that decision bothered me as well, because obviously individuals have First Amendment rights to freedom of religion, but it's weird to think that a corporation does, and by tightly held. So this isn't something that, say, Google or Facebook or a company that's on the Dow or in the NASDAQ or something could do, because these are diversely held companies. But so what tightly held, I believe, means is like that are 95 or 100% owned. So a very large small business. Is that correct?
They're called closely held corporations. They're probably family. They're not on the stock market, etc. However, the way I explain it is, you know, you can have your religious views, you can go to church, get all those great tax savings, you don't have to pay for fire, sidewalk. But if you start a business, and if you do it in your home, you can do anything you want, you know, sell stuff, etc. But once you have a business that is in the public square, it's got a sidewalk in front of it, then in my opinion, you are obligated to serve the people who are on that sidewalk and walk in. And you know about the bakery cases and not making a cake for somebody who's gay, et cetera, then don't enter the business. I think that we are going the wrong way when we say a business can discriminate against anybody.
Yeah. So I was going to say here it's interesting because I tend to disagree with both of you on this. And I'm a staunch atheist. I mean, religion it doesn't sit well with me at all, but I think it's a private organization. They started their own business. They grew it from the ground up. No one is forcing people to work there. If they don't share those religious views, they can get a job somewhere else. So, I mean,
but that's not the issue.
As far as individual rights go, I mean, isn't the right of the business owner, in this case, not a publicly traded company, to really do whatever they want?
No, remember the issue was there was Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. And under Affordable Care Act, if you had to fulfill certain obligations, and one of those was birth control for women.
Okay.
So they're asking for an exception from the law that binds every other corporation, every other business. And they're saying, no, we don't have to do that. Mm-hmm. We, because of and you know, this goes back to Citizens United a little bit, the Supreme Court decision that said corporations are people. I don't think they could have gotten there without Citizens United, which obviously screwed our whole funding system for political campaigns. But this is saying I don't have to comply with a law that every other business has to, because I'm a corporation that has religious views. Now, You form a corporation. Does a corporation have religious views? Of course not. We talk about guaranteeing individuals the right to exercise their religious freedom. We don't talk about businesses. That's not what the Constitution says. It's
Right.
you have, it's the person who has that liberty. And it's a separation between church and state. And when you form a business, you have to follow state laws. So I disagree.
And think about the liabilities too, right? I mean, like, so you have your money, right? Good. Karen Garst has her own personal money, but if you start Business X could be sued out of existence, but Karen Garst still has her money, right? So this is my problem. Like, so the business is a separate entity, like, that shouldn't have the same rights as people. Like, maybe if that was not incorporated and wholly, like, that money was mixed in with his, then maybe I can accept this. But the thing is, if Hobby Lobby goes down, the owners, no, they still have whatever property. They're not liable. So if you don't have that liability, you shouldn't have the right.
I don't know. You now you're getting into semantics, because you
I
could, they
don't
could
like
have
the decision.
incorporated as an LLC or
Doesn't
a
matter.
partnership.
But that's an entity.
They could be sued. They could be liable. Somebody fell in the store.
Sure.
They would have to have insurance.
But the owner isn't liable. See, this is what I'm saying. There's a distinct difference between the corporation and the individual. So you could sue Hobby Lobby out of existence, but the person that owns Hobby Lobby, you can't touch them. See that? So therefore, you shouldn't get that is not a person.
No, you bring up a good point, and this is where the pendulum swings from either conservative views on this or liberal views on this, where does federal law supersede everything else, and how much right does the government have to essentially to control the actions of a corporation? And so in this case, if there's a mandate to do something and I have my own company, how do I feel that it's moral for the government to tell me what to do, or can I run my ship the way that I want to? So that it gets interesting political differences.
Let's put it in a different context. How about if they decided not to serve Black customers?
Mm-hmm.
How would you both feel about that?
Bullshit.
Well, that's exactly the ruling with the cake people that didn't want to serve cakes to gay people, and the free market people said, well, listen, just boycott the business. They'll go out of business because money doesn't discriminate.
If you only serve half the population, you'll go right.
Exactly.
Well, that decision was very narrow on artistic expression, so I don't think that's as broad perhaps as even the Hobby Lobby decision. But this all started out with Catholic hospitals, when Obamacare came about, and what ends up happening is the government pays. So we're basically subsidizing Hobby Lobby to provide these mandates under the Affordable Care Act. But okay, we've probably...
That's my problem, because right now as a business owner, I'd be like, oh, loophole. I guess I'm going to claim religious status if I need to save money. I could just claim this. And like, I guess a better analogy is like, what if it was a Jehovah's Witness company that said, I'm not going to pay for your blood transfusion. Sorry, you're on the hook for that 10 grand.
Or how about Viagra?
Or that, there you go. Or like a Muslim company that says, I'm not going to pay for your vaccines because they're from a porcine derivative.
Mm-hmm.
Like these are a lot easier to object to if you're kind of raised in that Christian, you feel sympathetic to it. So I get this sympathy that people feel, but I'm with you. I don't agree with the decision.
I think it's interesting to come back to if they didn't want to serve Black people, would that be okay? And frankly, I just think with the with the social climate that we have, that business would go out of business so fast, no matter how big it is. If Walmart decided not to serve Black customers tomorrow, and Walmart is incredibly successful, that's it. They're done. And so do you really need to legislate against that? Or can you just let the market destroy the business? Because remember, with the Civil Rights Act, the reason why they passed it is because there were laws on the books saying you can't serve Black customers or separate but equal. And so with the Civil Rights Act, essentially removed those laws from the books. Now businesses could do whatever they wanted. And I think that the freedom of the market to self-regulate is really a beautiful thing philosophically, because it's going to weed out all of the racists. But again, maybe it's wishful thinking. I'm just thinking if a business decided to ban Jews from going there first of all, I wouldn't want to go there in the first place because fundamentally they've now discriminated against me. But two is, I would now push a massive campaign in order to, boycott all their goods. And I think it'd be very successful. So
yeah, and it's true that I think in Norway or Sweden, if this had happened, it would have closed down. But we still have a population that identifies the majority as Christian. The atheists are 20-25%. So until we get a little higher, we're not going to have that wherewithal, I think, to say boycott Hobby Lobby. Although political action, I think, is crucial, and it has achieved so many things in the past.
Rapidly growing, though. The nuns are picking up steam. Nuns meaning no religion.
Right. But then there's apolitical types that aren't going to take it. They're going to just eat whatever chicken sandwich they like and buy their crafts wherever. But I want to get away from the Hobby Lobby thing and so the faithless feminists. So we kind of talked about the faithless part coming from the Hobby Lobby, but the feminist part, I guess I wanted to open with who do you think is a good role model? Like if I said pick a woman that is a good role model to young women, what would you do? I'm going to give you that ground ball. How are you going to field it?
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
All right.
28-year-old woman who beat out a 10-term white male Democratic member of Congress in the Bronx. If she can do that, you can do anything.
Right on.
But is that by virtue of her being in the Bronx and there being a very kind of minority-driven community there?
Well, it wouldn't have happened in Phoenix.
Well, right. Yeah. So that's kind of what I'm saying is that
clearly, but somebody who's willing to take that on. And yes, it's a minority community if you look at Latinas and African Americans, etc. But the courage and the bravery and the stamina and just the thought that I could beat him, to me, is a model for women. Don't say no. Don't reject anything that you want to do because you think you might not succeed, because you can.
So is
classic
that
underdog?
Yeah. Is that more a model for women? Is that a model for women, or more so a model for when Bernie Sanders was running the grassroots campaign and he said, listen, this doesn't stop here. Even if I don't win, get out there and get into local politics. And he influenced a slew of people to get going, and that's actually where she came from, as kind of that grassroots movement. So it's just interesting. I've never pegged her as oh no, she's definitely a feminist, and that's the label that I would attach to her. I would kind of label her as a baby Bernie Sanders, or one that comes from his loins.
Well, I think I am not as familiar with third wave feminism, but my hero is Elizabeth Cady Stanton.
Okay.
She was a suffragist in the 19th century, and she was a free thinker, was what they called him, an atheist. And she wrote the Women's Bible, and Susan B. Anthony wasn't all that excited about her because she was an atheist. I mean, in the 19th century, you are an outspoken woman who's an atheist. I mean, come on, that's impressive. I know I wouldn't have had the courage to do that. I don't think I would have. I think I was I was born in a pretty conservative environment. I was very shy in high school. Nobody would believe it. But that's how I started out. But remember, I was in Madison, Wisconsin in the 70s. So in addition to walking through a dorm and just smelling the pot, it was my political education. I mean, I have a PhD, and what it is to me was a relationship I had with other people and what I learned about politics. That was the education I got in Madison in the 70s.
Is there a case to be made that now in the 21st, beyond that, in 2018, whatever, starting in the late 2000s, it's just because you mentioned courage, and that's not the word that would have come to mind, because at this point, anyone who has a phone is really, they put a 5-minute video up there, they could be famous overnight. So I almost feel like with the screen time and just the amount of notoriety that people get for random tweets, it's almost like things are no longer courageous. They just happen. And yes, you need a lot of stamina to run a campaign and to beat someone. But if you feel passionately, and a lot of young people have activism in their hearts.
But everyone's going to tell you that you can't do it. I mean, the odds of her winning were low. I mean, you put that in Vegas odds.
But that doesn't take courage because ultimately at 27 or 28, however old she was when she won, you do that, and let's say you fail, you have a great story to tell your grandkids. Oh, back in 2018, I ran a campaign, and so win, lose, it doesn't matter. It was a great experience for her.
But I think, when you look at that small black boy who saw Obama, to me, that is the essence of a model. If you see a black president and you're black, you go, shit, I can be anything. And when I was growing up in the 50s, women were teachers, secretaries, or nurses. And it's not as if, I remember taking this ninth grade science class in evolution, and I did a paper on early hominids. Fascinating. I held on to that for 40 years and finally got rid of it. Too bad. But it never occurred to me to be an anthropologist or a paleontologist. I didn't know what they were. I had already gotten stuck on French and wanted to be French teacher. My mother was a teacher. My sister was a teacher. It's not as if I would have gone to my parents and said, I want to be a paleontologist. They would have been incredibly supportive because they were like that. It never occurred to me because there weren't any models out there. All the science teachers were men. It never occurred to me.
Is a little bit behind you, right?
Pardon?
Jane Goodall is a little bit behind.
Oh, she was way after me. Yeah. I mean, after I probably could have done that. And, to this day, my husband's a biologist, and we watch a lot of documentaries, and I have read a ton of books. In fact, I wanted to write a series of novels talking about what it was like for women and starting in the Paleolithic. And I'm having lunch with somebody I met at one of my book signings who's a very good writer. And I'm going to propose, let me do the research and you write the book. But wouldn't it be cool to have this series of like what it was like? And one of the things I say, okay, I'm going to go down the rabbit hole here. My husband, when I start talking, it goes, she's going to get to the Paleolithic. I know she is.
Stone Age, right?
So can you imagine what it was like for the hunter to go out, the big animals, male hunters, get stabbed, bleed to death, and die, and then come back to that cave, and here's a woman who bleeds every month. She bleeds with the cycles of the moon. Hello. She gets pregnant. She stops bleeding. And they thought until the 19th century that blood formed the baby. They didn't know about eggs, female eggs in the ovaries until the 19th century. So of course there was reverence for females. So what would that be like? Tell a story about that and then move forward. So who knows?
Well, that brings up a good point. Is there's a lot of talk of the repressive patriarchy and the fact that society is skewed against women. And I know you're going to get into this during your panel when you talk to Karen, but it's weird because it really can't be both ways. It can't be, oh, there's so much reverence, but then also there's a lot of repression. And you had talked about, lack of role models. Do you think, we are at a point where now there are role models, there's really no hurdles? And so...
Okay, when I was talking about the Paleolithic was to say that early on, there was certainly reverence for this feminine divine. There were goddesses. If you check before Islam in Arabic culture, and one of the women who, in my new book, Women versus Religion, talks about that. I have two African Americans who write about what was the culture in Africa. There were queens, there were goddesses. But when monotheism came along, we had a pantheon. You remember your high school mythology class, right. And there were gods and goddesses. But when monotheism came along, they eliminated the feminine divine. And what better way to eliminate the feminine divine than taking everything associated with her, the tree, the snake, rejuvenation, etc.,
and
make it wrong?
That's the feminine. Mary's the feminine.
But she's
divine.
Really not until added till later. Like, Mary is actually a fairly,
she is arguably the most important in Catholicism.
Okay, if you're a woman and you're a Christian, you have two models. You have Eve the sinner and Mary the Virgin Mother.
Yeah.
Okay, that's not a lot of role models.
Mary Magdalene. Don't
Mary
forget
Magdalene.
the whore,
Yeah.
right? That's the other one.
Well, that's not what we would call a positive role model.
Exactly. Right, but no, that's what I don't
Some of
like
us-
about the old school religion. You have Virgin, Madonna, or whore. Like they're your choices.
That's true. Yeah.
But now, one of the things I was gonna ask, I absolutely agree with getting rid of the goddesses is generally a bad thing. I wonder though if it's religion or if it's specifically desert religion, because you don't see this in places where there's an abundance. Like in India, you get things like the Kama Sutra that celebrate sex, where there's 14 different words for ant, because it's plentiful. But in a desert religion, births and sex might be shamed because an unplanned pregnancy might tip over the tribe. But in rainforest cultures where you have an abundance, you see the goddesses hang around. What do you think?
Well, there certainly are goddesses in the Hindu religion, but I think if we looked at India, we would still say, yeah, patriarchy.
Yeah.
You ask about patriarchy. I mean, what's amazing sometimes when I listen to Karen Straughn's videos is denial that there ever was a patriarchy. And if I had my little time machine, I'd put her back in the 19th century and say, how'd you like that? You know, how'd you like that?
Now, it's a good point. Now, what she argues is that even before women had the right to vote, that women held power.
Yeah.
Now, it wasn't political power. Certainly, the right to vote wasn't granted to them, but they held an enormous amount of social power. She will cite Dolly Madison being absolutely essential to James Madison's presidency, because she's the socialite. She's the one that is almost creating the campaign. He's the little bookworm. She's the dynamic one.
Jackie
she also gives a good example, in World War I, in Britain, where she cites the Carnation Brigade. And this was a brigade of young women that went out and pinned a carnation on any draft eligible or fighting soldier, and that didn't sign up for the draft and didn't sign up for the French Expeditionary Force. Pin that. The social stigma was so great that they couldn't really come back in society, so they had no choice but to sign up for the draft and get over, and then perhaps die.
Okay.
Is that not power?
In the 19th century, I'm a single woman. My culture tells me that I cannot have sex unless I'm married, that I must be a virgin when I'm married. And if I marry in the 19th century, anything I own belongs to my husband. Our laws were based on common law, England. And if there was such a thing as a divorce, or if the husband died, they could put in their will to give the children of that couple to anyone else. I could not attend a university. I could not own property. If you think that's equal because I might have some influence by discussions with my husband, that's not equality to me. Thank you very much.
No, I don't think it's equal.
And I don't think we would make that. It would be interesting for you to talk to Karen. I don't know how Karen would disagree with you.
I think her argument was that women weren't without power. I think that some argue, and I don't know where you stand on this, Karen, that women had absolutely zero power. They had the power of the family pet, right? Where
no one would make the argument. That argument absolute.
There's a difference between power and influence. Now, certainly, I mean, my husband and I discuss things. I feel I have some influence there. He did decide that the posts on the fence didn't need to be painted, which I wanted painted, but I always defer to him on the outside.
Did you help him paint? That's the real question.
I did. I did a lot of the trim. We stained the fence.
Okay.
And the 4x4s in the middle aren't stained, and it's driving me crazy because I'm Norwegian. They got a match.
Okay, because I painted the fence with my wife a week ago, and so I feel you, and I feel your frustration.
Okay, now I had time to think this out. Is an influence a form of power? I mean, for example, the politician has power. He actually has the vote in Congress. But I'm a very wealthy donor, for example.
Right.
I have enormous influence. Isn't that influence a form of power?
Influencing can have an impact. To me, it is a far cry from women having the right to vote and make decisions that they don't have to convince somebody else of, that they make their minds up themselves and they choose what to do in the privacy of the ballot box.
Yeah.
Now, Karen Strawn, now I know that if you want to be a Jordan Peterson or a Paul Elam with a men's rights, you've got to be outrageous. But when she says women should not have the right to vote because they didn't participate in the American Revolution, I go, yeah, right. Nobody believes that, because guess what? Men made the laws that they couldn't participate in the revolution. So little catch-22 there.
Okay, and I didn't know she made that argument, but she did say that there were plenty of people that were worried, or women specifically, when the suffragettes and when the amendment was coming around in the early 20th century, that didn't necessarily want the amendment because they were afraid that if they get the right to vote, that then they would be compelled to sign up and be eligible for the draft.
And we don't even need to talk about the 19th century. We can talk about the 20th century. We can talk about the Equal Rights Amendment. And when Phyllis Schlafly came on board to oppose the ERA, she built on that same fear, which is you're not going to be able to stay home with your kids anymore. And she did enough of it that we had a bipartisan support of the Equal Rights Amendment. I don't even know that it may have been proposed by Republicans, but it was bipartisan support in Congress. It went out to the states. It was going great guns. And then Phyllis Schlafly, who's a lawyer, who went to college, who did all this, from the conservative side said, no, if we have the Equal Rights Amendment, you might be subject to the draft. You might be this, you might be that. Well, I have an ulterior motive. I would love women to be subject to the draft, because then I know the Republican legislators would be very reticent to start a war because they wouldn't want their daughters there. So let's go for it.
Yeah, no, it's a valid point. We actually had someone, it's funny, we had someone in the comment section say that talking about the Revolutionary War thing is a straw man of Karen's argument, which I don't know, but I assume that you two will get into that when you're on stage in September, which I'm very excited for. I do want to come back to, you had mentioned, however long ago, probably 15 minutes ago, that you were not as familiar with third wave feminism. And again, I hope you guys cover this, even though your talk is not necessarily on feminism. And then you harken back to Stanton and first and second wave feminism. But the biggest gripes that people have in today's day and age is with third wave, and arguably there's even a fourth wave now of feminism. So when your blog is called The Faithless Feminist and you're a self-styled feminist, you're hearkening back to those days, but that's not how people will see this and the moniker that you've attached to yourself. So
absolutely.
How do you distance yourself from this toxic, like all men are evil feminism of the late 20th century?
Hey, I love men. I've been married for 30 years to one. I have a 27-year-old millennial son. I love men. Come on. Hello.
We love you too.
I believe that.
I think that there are always extremes. There's always going to be, it's all a bell curve. When you look at science, no matter what you do, it's a bell curve. Let's look at height of women, bell curve. Let's look at strength of men, bell curve. Right. So you're always going to have somebody on each side. Now we have the alt-right, and now we have the left, which goes into all of these identity politics, intersectionality, and all of those type of things. So I've been doing this, I've been asking people, have you ever heard of what a men's rights activist is?
Most people don't know what that is.
They don't have a clue,
right.
Which means it's the bell curve. Now, I appreciate that you have decided to have a little more edgy, controversial people on. And when I got criticized for coming on Mythcon, I said, look, I don't care if I can change the mind or one or two of those people in the audience. What do you think I've been doing for the last 4 years? You know, trying to make a dent in women going to church. So there's always going to be extremes. I personally came of age in the 60s and 70s. And I talked to you before we got on air about, you know, going to the University of Wisconsin and political education. I mean, that was my political education. So no, I'm not as familiar with it, but there's going to be radicals always on either side. And do you want to spend your time there, or do you want to spend your time a little closer to the middle?
Well, not necessarily spending time there. It's in this, maybe is my personal opinion. Maybe it reflects the mainstream. I don't know. I'll let folks decide. But you mentioned like, oh, you've got the alt-right and their fringe. But it's not like conservatives, for example, across the board have been tarnished by the alt-right label. People try to do that, but it's not really sticking. Versus feminism, for example, where, I mean, the word has so much gravitas at this point. Most people in the UK don't identify themselves as feminists. Most people in the US women don't identify themselves as feminists, specifically because it's been dragged through the mud by the third wave feminists so much. And I've made this claim on the show before, it is not something that you can revive. And I can't, who were we talking to where I said, well, why not pick a new term and then just carry that banner, which is egalitarianism. But it sounds like you don't agree with that. You still think you can save the feminist moniker.
Okay. If I ask people in the town I live in, okay, 10,000 people, Oregon, and when I decided to do Mythcon, I started to ask people to define feminism, and they would say gender equality.
Really? Yeah, a lot of people do.
So I think you've got to be a little careful about those who are on social media a lot and the common person. Most people I have asked, and the women I have asked about the definition of feminism, nobody has talked about third wave. Nobody. So, and I don't care. I don't care about the label. I picked Faithless Feminist because he proposed godless grandmother, and I really didn't want to be known as a. Let's not emphasize the age thing, please. I mean, it does. It's an alliteration, godless grandmother. I am a grandmother. I'm godless, but okay. So we came up with Faithless Feminist. You know, I was active in the 60s and 70s, and then I'm not saying I turned it off, but once I started my different careers and did other things, it came up in issues of, I was a union representative, and I had a woman, I had done a program on sexual harassment, and she said, I'm being sexually harassed. I can't afford to lose my job. I can't file a grievance. And I felt really bad about that. So it came up in that context. It came up when I personally was discriminated against when they hired somebody who had less responsibility than I did and gave him $30,000 more than me. And I said, hello, I'll sue you. And I ended up with a $30,000 raise.
Well, that's good. So, there's absolutely examples. And right, feminism to me is defined so widely, so broadly, so amorphously that if you say that, I don't even know. You have to dig down and ask
almost
what you
feels
mean.
like you need to defend it.
What
at
I
some
mean
point.
at college campuses, for example, right? There's a certain orthodoxy of, call it third wave or call it the new feminism, that strikes me as religious. Like there's an orthodoxy that if you cross it, you get the same thing. To me, I'm like, in some ways, some of the hardest core radical progressive left sounds exactly to me like the religious right. And I think they're in greater numbers, like than say the alt-right. I think the alt-right are marginalized. Even the Proud Boys, right? The Proud Boys are these Trumpian conservatives that like they've taken a vow to no masturbation because they proves their manliness or something, right? And now these guys, that when the neo-Nazis came to a Trump rally, they literally threatened to kick their ass and drove them out. I do think that the conservatives have actually marginalized like the neo-Nazis, but can the liberal left marginalize, you know, like push away the illiberal left that's pushing kind of the toxic feminism? What are your thoughts?
Well, academia. One of my best friends is Peter Boghossian. He's a professor at Portland State. Somebody introduced me early on. I'm having coffee with him on Friday. He's been a mentor throughout this whole process. And if you want to have somebody talk about women's studies, have him on. But, you know, there's a reason that I didn't go into academia. I mean, I saw this when I did a master's in French literature, and structuralism, postmodernism was there. Somebody did a report on Émile Zola's novel, Germinal, which was about a coal strike and women starving and going to the baker, and the baker wouldn't give him bread, so they cut off his penis. And he counted the number of times the word blue appeared. Therefore, it was about women. And it was bullshit. It was total bullshit. And I think what happens in academia, this may be outside some science categories because I'm not sure you could do this with chemistry, but you get into a mindset and everyone has to toe the line to the mindset, and it's absurd. It can just reach obscene proportions. And I said, you know, every time I disagreed with somebody, I was told not to disagree with them, et cetera, et cetera. It was ridiculous. And I knew that at a pretty young age.
Where do you think it's incumbent on you or anyone else to defend public figures like Peter? Because I know you were on the Brainstorm podcast. I don't know if it was yesterday or maybe last week, but the host there completely threw Peter under the bus, said, oh, he argues in bad faith, you know, basically called him a piece of shit without using those words. And I was listening to that because obviously you were on, and you know, you were talking about Mythcon, so thank you, by the way, for mentioning it. But I was like, well, if I were on there, I'd go, hey, well, listen, slow down, buddy. Have you ever met him? Have you ever talked to him? You know, the guy is educated. But where do you think there's a responsibility to kind of have civil discourse when people are being called things that they potentially are not in public?
Well, Carl Benjamin was at PSU and talking with Peter, and I'd met, you know, Carl last year at Mythcon, and I went up and said hi. And, you know, they had this panel discussion, and there wasn't anything I really disagreed with. You know, they tried to get women's studies people on there. They wouldn't come. And they said, oh, my God, we can't even get to the subject of fatherhood. You know, and it's a shame. I think we really need to re-examine academia, especially universities, because to me, education is about critical thinking. When I worked for the Oregon Federation of Teachers, the American Federation of Teachers, our national organization, was really into developing curriculum on critical thinking. And one of the things they said, here's a penny. What can you tell me about the culture of that civilization from the penny? And try it. I mean, representation, actual representation of people, like not comical, right? It had an alphabet. It had a writing system. It had numbers, and getting people to think rather than rote learning. Memorize the capitals of the countries of Africa. They've all changed since I grew up. That was a waste of time. And I think critical thinking belongs everywhere.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Now, when it comes to, like, I think, and Valerie Trico like breaks it out as like social liberalism and then structural oppression. That these are the kind of the narratives that on the left. One kind of is based in Enlightenment thinking, and the other in critical theory. Like, what do you think that women today, in your opinion, like where would they face structural oppression?
Well, for example, and I would argue, and I will argue, that women have not achieved gender equality. There are a lot of things Karen says that I empathize with and would like to talk about ways of moving forward on that. Again, I'm married to a man. I have a son who's 27. But, and where was I going? Tell me your question again. I totally lost it.
Where do women face structural oppression?
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you.
If any.
One of the examples is, okay, I was first chair flute in high school. Every single flutist was a woman. The minute you turned on the TV and saw an orchestra, they were all men. And I said, where in the hell did they learn to play the flute? So there's It's the same true with chefs. Women were cooking in the homes. The minute it was paid, it was a chef, and they were all men, right? So
But are we talking about the 70s or are we talking 2018?
Oh no, we were talking 60s. You know, right. I just didn't know where they learned how to play the flute. But the head flutist of the Boston Symphony, given seniority, et cetera, take those variables out, makes 75% of the first chair, oboe, trombone, 6 other groups. And the oboist, who's a man, said, she is probably the best flutist in the United States, and she every bit deserves to earn what I do. And she's paid 75%. So I don't think that's an anomaly. I think we still need to work on it, but hell, we have made a ton of progress in my lifetime. My mother wanted to go to art school and ask her dad to major in art. He told her, you'll be a teacher. I was influenced by the models of teachers and chose that. And now I know the young people today, I want to, my granddaughter, I'm going to be a writer. I'm going to be a scientist. I can be whatever I want to be. 3 generations, there have been enormous changes, but we're not totally there yet.
Now, what do you think, like, when we're looking at outcome like this, let's take medicine, for example. Like, you have a huge amount of women in medicine at obviously at the nursing level, but at the physician level as well. And they're absolutely dominating certain fields of medicine completely, like GYN, psychiatry, and a lot of these, so they're owning it. But you only see it, but in surgical residencies, it's smaller. It's say like 20 to 27% women. I mean, do we demand that these women that we need like equality in surgical residency, or are these women just smarter because they want a work-life balance? Because like a surgical residency is hardcore. Like, I mean, most men, even like this man, wouldn't want that. Like it's crazy. Like, do we need equality across every?
Well, you're not going to get it. Let's take construction. I remember when I was in the work for a union in the early 80s, women were kind of getting into construction. There was a lot of discrimination. But is that something, if you want a career and you want children, you're not going to be able to do that. It's just not feasible. You're not going to get up on a roof. Nobody's going to let you get up on a roof when you're 8 months pregnant. And can you really, with no maternity leave, no paternity leave, can you do that? No, you can't. So you do choose things based on what you want to be. And I don't believe in 50%, 50%. And frankly, when you get to 20 or 30%, then anybody can do it. That number 1, that trailblazer is difficult. Number 2 is probably hard. You get to 20 or 30%, no excuse. If you want to do it, do it. But there are some fields where you just can't be pregnant working on a roof.
And that's the interesting thing is, I think you are not an outlier. When I say outlier, I mean, you're rational in your beliefs of feminism. And it'll be interesting when you're talking to Karen, because, outside of maybe the Revolutionary War comment, whatever, and I don't know enough about it, I would say that she's also rational, but maybe kind of on the opposite side. And so it'll be interesting where you disagree, because I think you will find an incredible amount of agreement with her, where women want to choose things that are better work-life balance because, they want to have a family, etc. But it'll be interesting if you guys find areas of disagreement. I don't know, like that example of orchestra, the arts and really music is so corrupt that I don't think it's the best example, because it has so many problems.
They've rectified that, right?
The screen thing doesn't help,
and they put the screen and the carpet because they didn't want the women's high heels clicking to give away the.
It doesn't. They know who's playing. I have a buddy who's a professional cellist, and he's like, it's all bullshit, and it's like the mafia, basically. They rig everything ahead of time.
Okay, let me give you another example. I will reveal one argument. Okay, rape. You take 40 years ago, why didn't a woman want to report rape? What was the backlash she got from our culture
She'd get stigmatized that she was a whore and she was not a virgin.
You shouldn't have dressed like that. You shouldn't have gone out with him, etc. We spent, what, 40, 50 years combating that? And
Okay.
I am amazed that the Me Too didn't happen in the 60s. So we still have that happening. But, okay, would you admit that you were raped by a woman?
That's interesting.
Well, no, but I'm not. Is that even possible?
Yeah,
I don't even know if that definition actually exists. It definitely does on college campuses.
She suggests
you're seeing retributive cases of men claiming rape by women, although it may be because they're afraid that it's going to go the other way around.
Yeah, but that's because they're preemptively trying to prevent a lawsuit. I'm saying, and maybe to Karen's point, with our libidos, I'm generalizing here, being so high, would you even complain if you were
I don't
taken
think,
advantage of?
No, like I don't. I think generally in the culture, as far as I was concerned, like I just didn't think that could happen. Like,
okay, but let's say it does happen. A man today is not going to tell his buddy drinking beer that he was raped by a woman because he will be made fun of. Just like the woman was saying, "Oh, you got raped. You asked for it. It was the way you dressed, etc." And the other issue is, would you say you were raped if you were raped by a man? No, because then somebody might think you're gay. And if you're not gay, that's not okay. So when you are the victim of something, you have to encounter and really work against so much of the culture that doesn't allow you to speak. Women have spent 50 years talking about rape, and we're at the point 50 years later where it's not okay. Men haven't started that conversation yet.
But most rape, I think, of men is by other men, right? Primarily in prison.
More so than women.
Well, and it goes. I think you guys are really simplifying this, because take rape out of the picture. Anything where you're embarrassed, like you got swindled, you were punched in the face by someone, it doesn't matter who. If you lose, and I'll say rape is a form of losing, generally speaking, you just don't want to talk about it. And so that's never going to change. Like if you're a loser, and I'm not trying to be facetious or like downplay that, but if something happened to you and you are seen
You've
as
experienced a loss.
Yes. No one is going to want to admit that. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. So I don't know if we can paint a gender on it necessarily.
Well, okay, for example, we have prisons and more private prisons. It is inexcusable to me that whether it's the guard doing it or another prisoner, that we cannot protect people from rape. Yeah. That is unconscionable to me.
I agree.
And that is something I would absolutely support and work on.
Right.
But
now,
I think it's
from the culture of no snitching. I mean, it's really interesting in prison cultures where the male prisons, if you snitches get stitches, right? This is why rapes aren't reported. This is why it's
absolutely.
But in women's prisons, it's the absolute opposite. The reports, actually, the guards are overwhelmed with reports. It's constant snitching. So nothing ever happens. It's weird when it gets to these extremes that you see, like the women mass social shaming, and then men creating this absolute
we have the
society.
Technology to prevent it. I think it's more so society looks at it like, listen, you're a bad apple, you already committed a crime, and if you get porked in the ass, then you know what, that's part of your punishment.
Right, but people wouldn't tolerate male guards raping female inmates.
Yeah, we're talking about inmate on inmate, and we're really sidetracked now into like should we be preventing sexual assault in prisons?
Okay, let's move on.
Yeah, okay. So here, Karen's argument is that, okay, even if we take the oppressed versus the oppressor, right? Like structural oppression, what she'll claim is that, yes, while there do exist certain structural oppressions for women, she thinks that the structural oppressions against men are greater in number, are greater in importance. She specifically brings up child custody laws, the fact that there's no domestic abuse shelters for men, like it, especially in parenting and custody. Like she gave an example of that her and her boyfriend pull into the driveway with a bunch of groceries, and she's hauling them all in, And then immediately the neighbor looks and goes, why did you carry those? And is he not good enough to help you?
So social
like
norms.
that, right? But that's a shaming of men. That, you know, she's like, what? I can carry my own stuff, you know. But what she's saying, but specifically in paternity rights, like what are your thoughts there?
Well, I think the issue is, again, it's a little like the rape issue. You have got to pursue it. And do you know anybody who's a stay-at-home dad?
Yeah, one.
Oh.
Okay. Well, and I know one too. And in spite of my progressive nature or whatever, there's a cultural piece of me that going, oh, he's not working.
Yeah.
And you will talk to stay-at-home dads who get that. Oh, you're looking for a job. It must be nice to stay at home and not work, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of it is, it's just culture. I was going to do this, but I didn't. I saved you. I was going to wear something really revealing today. And I was going to let you get really uncomfortable with it to broach the issue of culture. And there are things we internalize. If I would have come with something like a bra or something on, you wouldn't have said anything, but you would have been uncomfortable with it. So we have a culture, and some things are okay and some things aren't okay. And now I think sexual harassment against women is gaining the point that's not okay. Look at how many people have been fired. Look at Nike, et cetera. Yeah. So if there's an issue involving men, it's going to have that same trajectory. There's going to have to be men speaking out, men being stay-at-home dads, men wanting custody, et cetera, et cetera. So it's everything in culture takes a long time. It takes a long time to change our opinions and our absolutely gut reaction to something.
No, I agree that it does take that slow thing. And that's a lot of my critique against kind of the far progressive left that are demanding instant change, literally from everyone.
Does that get back to the point of, we had started the show talking about courage, or Karen, you had mentioned courage, and I made the argument this doesn't take a lot of courage. My personal opinion is that as we move on in the digital age where everyone has a platform, it's taking less and less courage to take random stands, no matter if it's for paternal leave, staying at home, whatever. I mean, people just don't care. They're so busy with their own lives that if you make some sort of a public statement or you take up a position that I want to be a stay-at-home dad or whatever, no one cares. You will find so many allies. It's no longer standing alone. So I almost feel like courage is dissipating from.
Well, here's the problem. I think the problem is, and I will say that my agreeing to be on Mythcon it's an area that I haven't done a lot of studies, so I've been reading a lot about it. Awesome. And I've gone down the rabbit hole and looked at 4chan and Reddit, etc. I think you have to worry about being on the extreme and what you're going to see when you see somebody kill somebody in Toronto and they were an incel. You know, you've got to, when you take those radical views, somebody can latch on them who doesn't have the perspective to balance that. And I think that's a problem.
And there's good data, like there's a recent article that came out in QLET, and I think it was sourced from another magazine, but that when people of like mind talk to each other, it pushes towards either extreme. So if you have a whole bunch of conservatives all discussing, even though they have differing conservative viewpoints, everything shifts right.
Echo chamber.
And the echo chamber on the left shifts left. So what I think we're seeing in social media is pushing this. Incels are gathering with other incels, and they're radicalizing. And that what Mythcon is about is to bring in not necessarily the radicals, but I still think the mainstream left and the mainstream right are far enough apart to where there's plenty of disagreement. We need to be, I think that moderates people.
It also seems like a weird, you guys just talked about incels. It's been one incident, I think, ever, that at least that's been proven, where there were.
No, I mean, he referenced Elliot Rodger.
I don't know who Elliot Rodger is.
A guy went postal misogynist, killed a bunch of women.
Okay, I'm just saying they seem like isolated cases, and so to whatever.
But it's a phenomenon. But I was talking on our timeline, on my Twitter timeline with Brittany Simon, And it's radical. Like it's a little weird. And again, I went into that conversation to explore a little bit of these beliefs, and it's just, I mean, he cites statistics that simply aren't true. I mean, he said there were statistics he gave me that said that because of social media, 0% of women in the United States in 2018 are celibate, and 36% of men are. And I thought that's just bullshit. Right away, there's no source, and I'm like, there is just no way that's true. But the thing is, it supports that belief that we must be talking to people that we disagree with. I think if we want to get at the truth or closer to what the truth is, and so we don't radicalize.
And that's what Mythcon is all about, which, Karen, we thank you for for being there. In about a month, almost 2 months, I should say. On September 22nd, you're going to be speaking with Karen, and it's going to be on have women achieve gender equality in the United States. So we think it's going to be a fabulous topic. Personally, and I mean this truly, this is going to be my favorite panel of all the ones that we're hosting. I'm not exaggerating, and believe me, listen to all the other interviews. I will never say this is the #1 panel that I'm that I'll be there for. And just because I think it'll be a fabulous conversation between you two.
And Karen will be around too. You can talk to her directly. I ran up to her right after the Sargon Smith debate at the last Mythcon, and I think
this Karen, not Karen Strong.
No, Karen Garst, yeah. And I ran right up to Karen, and she asked the question, why are two men up talking about feminism? And I think I opened with why can't Amelia Earhart be my role model? And it actually brought a great discussion. I really appreciate it, and I'm better for it.
Well, I have an interview with Christy Winters on Sunday.
Oh, really?
Okay. Yeah. Oh, she's a friend of mine. So I will be chastised for being on Mythcon, but I will defend myself.
Well, then you can swing back at her, and all of the radical positions that you cited during the last hour, she tends to hold. So maybe you can tell her that she's not helping the feminist cause. Anyway, maybe.
Well, people can change too. Remember that anyone's view and anyone's podcast is a snapshot in time, and we have to give people room to grow and think and change.
Hey, you guys were great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely,
Karen. Very good. Yeah, thanks, Karen. Our pleasure.
We'll see you soon.